The morning sun barely broke through the tall windows of courtroom 4B as people filed in for another typical Monday. Coffee cups in hand, lawyers shuffled papers, and the air smelled like old wood and stress. Nobody expected anything unusual to happen that day. It was just another routine session at the municipal courthouse, the kind where traffic violations and small disputes get sorted out before lunch. Then he walked in. 17-year-old kid shuffled through the doors, wearing an oversized gray hoodie that practically swallowed his frame. His sneakers squeaked against the polished floor, scuffed and worn like he'd walked through every neighborhood in the city. His backpack looked heavy, stuffed with who knows what. He kept his head slightly down, not making eye contact with anyone as he made his way to the defendant's table. Judge Patricia Holloway sat at her bench, a woman in her late 50s with silver-streaked hair pulled back tight. She'd been on the bench for nearly 20 years and had seen thousands of cases roll through her courtroom. She prided herself on being tough but fair, the kind of judge who didn't waste time on nonsense. When she saw the teenager standing alone at the defendant's table, she didn't even try to hide her sigh. The bailiff called out the case number in that flat, practiced tone they all use. Trespassing at a corporate law office. The kid was accused of breaking into Morrison & Associates, one of the biggest law firms downtown, late at night. According to the complaint, he'd been caught on security cameras sneaking around the place after 11 at night. Judge Holloway leaned forward, squinting over her reading glasses. "Where's your attorney?" she asked, her voice already carrying that edge of impatience. The teenager looked up briefly. "I don't have one, Your Honor." The judge closed her eyes for a moment like she was summoning patience from somewhere deep inside. "Of course you don't," she muttered, loud enough for the front rows to hear. A few people in the gallery chuckled. "Young man, do you understand that you're facing criminal charges here? This isn't detention at school. This is real court with real consequences." "Yes, ma'am." "Ma'am?" Judge Holloway repeated, raising her eyebrows. "It's Your Honor in my courtroom." She spoke slowly, deliberately, like she was explaining something to a small child. "Do you even understand what trespassing means?" The kid nodded but didn't say anything else. His face remained neutral, almost blank, which only seemed to irritate the judge more. "Let me spell this out for you," Judge Holloway continued, warming up to her lecture. She leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "You're 17 years old. You got caught breaking into a law firm in the middle of the night. Without a lawyer, you're going to end up with a record that'll follow you around for the rest of your life. Can't get into college, can't get a decent job. Is that what you want?" "No, Your Honor." "Then why are you standing here without representation? Did you think you could just waltz in here, say you're sorry, and I'd let you go home?" There was an edge of mockery in her voice now. The prosecutor, a guy named Derek Moss who'd worked in the DA's office for 5 years, smirked from his table. He'd already figured this would be an easy win before his lunch break. The teenager shifted his weight but still didn't respond with anything beyond a quiet, "No, Your Honor." Judge Holloway shook her head slowly, like she was disappointed but not surprised. "You know what your problem is? Kids these days think they know everything. Watch a few legal dramas on TV and suddenly think they understand how the system works." A few more chuckles rippled through the courtroom. "Let me give you some free advice. You should have stayed in school instead of playing detective or lawyer or whatever you thought you were doing, breaking into that office." The words hung in the air. The kid's expression didn't change, but something flickered in his dark eyes for just a second. Something that might have been amusement or maybe determination. It was hard to tell. "Now," Judge Holloway continued, pulling the case file closer, "I'm going to assign you a public defender, and we're going to continue this case for 2 weeks. Maybe by then you'll understand the seriousness of what you've done. Bailiff, please coordinate with—" "Your Honor?" The teenager's voice cut through clearly. It was different now. Still respectful but firmer, more controlled. Judge Holloway looked up, annoyed at being interrupted. "Yes?" "I'd like to proceed today if that's possible." The judge blinked. "Excuse me?" "I'm ready to proceed with the hearing today. I don't need a continuance." Derek Moss looked up from his papers, suddenly interested. Judge Holloway stared at the kid like he'd just suggested they hold court on the moon. "Son," she said slowly, "you clearly don't understand what you're up against here. Mr. Moss over there has security footage, witness statements, police reports. He's going to bury you. You need a lawyer. I understand, Your Honor. Do you?" Judge Holloway leaned forward again, her voice dropping into that dangerous quiet tone that lawyers knew meant she was losing patience. Because from where I'm sitting, you look like every other teenager who thinks the rules don't apply to them. You break into a building, get caught, and now you want to represent yourself? That's not brave, son. That's foolish. The teenager reached down slowly and pulled his backpack onto the table. The sound of the zipper seemed loud in the quiet courtroom. He pulled out a worn leather folder, the kind that important documents get kept in. He held it carefully, respectfully, and looked directly at Judge Holloway for the first time. Your Honor, he said quietly, I'd like to submit something for the court's review before we continue. Judge Holloway waved her hand dismissively. Whatever it is, it can wait until... I think you'll want to see this now. Something in his tone made her stop. Made everyone stop. The bailiff walked over, took the folder from the teenager's hands and carried it up to the judge's bench. Judge Holloway opened it with obvious reluctance, probably expecting to see some handwritten note or printout from the internet about legal rights. What she saw instead made her freeze completely. Her eyes went wide. Her mouth opened slightly. She looked from the document to the teenager, then back to the document again. The color drained from her face as she read it more carefully, checking every detail like she couldn't believe what she was seeing. The courtroom had gone completely silent. Even Derek Moss sat up straighter, trying to figure out what was happening. Judge Holloway finally looked up, and when she spoke, her voice had lost all its mockery. It was flat, professional, careful. This says you're a licensed attorney. The teenager nodded once, calm as still water. Yes, Your Honor. I passed the California bar exam 3 months ago. Judge Holloway stared at the certificate like it might disappear if she blinked. Her fingers traced over the seal, checking if it was real. It was. Official stamp, registration number, everything legitimate. She'd been a judge long enough to spot a fake document, and this wasn't one. This skinny kid in the oversized hoodie was actually a licensed attorney. The whispers started immediately. People in the gallery leaned toward each other, cupping hands over mouths as they shared their shock. A couple of law students in the back row pulled out their phones, probably already texting their friends about what was happening. Even the court reporter looked up from her machine, eyebrows raised. Derek Moss stood up so fast his chair scraped loudly against the floor. Your Honor, I'd like to request a brief recess to... Sit down, Mr. Moss. Judge Holloway's voice cut through the noise like a knife. She wasn't smiling anymore. The mocking tone had vanished completely. She looked at the teenager with new eyes, really seeing him for the first time. How old did you say you were? 17, Your Honor. 17. She repeated it slowly, like she was trying to make sense of a puzzle. You're 17 years old and you're a licensed attorney. Yes, ma'am. Your Honor. He corrected himself quickly. Judge Holloway set the certificate down carefully on her bench. She took off her reading glasses and cleaned them with a cloth from her robe pocket, buying herself a moment to think. When she put them back on, her whole demeanor had shifted. The condescending judge who'd been lecturing a kid 5 minutes ago was gone. Now she was looking at him the way she'd look at any attorney in her courtroom. Well then, she said, her voice professional and measured. I assume you'll be representing yourself in this matter? Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to proceed with the hearing if the court allows. Judge Holloway glanced at Derek Moss, who still looked like someone had slapped him with a fish. Mr. Moss? Are you prepared to proceed? Derek cleared his throat and straightened his tie. Yes, Your Honor, the state is ready. But his confidence from earlier had taken a serious hit. You could hear it in his voice. Very well. Judge Holloway gestured toward the prosecutor. Mr. Moss, please present your case. Derek stood and buttoned his suit jacket, trying to recover his composure. He'd prosecuted hundreds of cases, but this one had just gotten weird. Still, the facts were the facts, right? He had everything he needed. Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of criminal trespassing, Derek began, falling into his familiar rhythm. On the night of September 15th, the defendant was caught on security cameras entering the law offices of Morrison and Associates at approximately 11:07 p.m. He bypassed the reception desk, accessed restricted areas including the records room, and was only discovered when a security guard condo. He pulled out a tablet and showed the security footage to the court. The video was grainy but clear enough. It showed the teenager entering through the front doors, looking around the lobby, then heading toward the back offices. The timestamp glowed in the corner of the screen. The defendant had no permission to be in that building after hours, Derek continued. When confronted by security, he was found in the archives room with multiple files spread across a desk. The guard, Mr. Raymond Torres, will testify that the defendant appeared startled and had no explanation for his presence. Derek paused for effect. Your Honor, this is textbook trespassing. The defendant knowingly entered private property without authorization. We ask that he be found guilty and sentenced accordingly. Derek sat down looking satisfied. It really did seem pretty open and shut. The teenager had been caught red-handed on camera. What could he possibly say? Judge Holloway turned to the defense table. Would you like to cross-examine the witness? Yes, Your Honor. I'd like to call Mr. Torres to the stand. The bailiff went to get the security guard who'd been waiting in the hallway. Raymond Torres was a big guy in his 50s, wearing his security uniform with the Morrison and Associates patch on the shoulder. He took the oath and settled into the witness chair, looking uncomfortable under all the attention. The teenager stood and walked toward the witness stand. He moved differently now, more confident. The shuffle was gone. He pulled a small notepad from his hoodie pocket. Mr. Torres, he began, his voice clear and professional. You've worked security at Morrison and Associates for how long? About 8 years now. 8 years. So you're familiar with the building's security protocols? Yes, sir. Very familiar. And on the night in question, you were doing your regular rounds? That's right. I check every floor twice during the night shift. When you found me in the archives room, I was seated at a desk with files spread out, correct? Raymond nodded. Yes, that's what I saw. Did I try to run when you entered the room? The security guard paused. Well, no. You looked up when I came in, but you didn't run or anything. Did I try to hide the files I was looking at? No, they were right there on the desk. Did I become aggressive or confrontational when you asked what I was doing? No, you were pretty calm, actually. Just surprised to see me. The teenager flipped a page in his notepad. Mr. Torres, in your 8 years working at Morrison and Associates, have you ever encountered consultants or attorneys working late at night? Sure, happens all the time. Lawyers work crazy hours. And how do you typically know if someone is authorized to be there after hours? Raymond shifted in his seat. Usually the front desk gives me a list. Or sometimes the partners send me an email about who's coming in late. And on the night of September 15th, did you check if I was on any authorized list before you called the police? The security guard's face changed. Well, No, I didn't check the list. You looked so young, I just assumed. You assumed I didn't belong there because of how I looked? Derek Moss jumped to his feet. Objection, Your Honor, he's badgering the witness. Judge Holloway held up her hand. Overruled. Answer the question, Mr. Torres. Raymond rubbed the back of his neck. I guess, yeah. I saw a teenager in a hoodie and I figured something was wrong. Didn't think to check the access list first. The teenager reached into his backpack and pulled out a document. He handed it to the bailiff, who passed it to Judge Holloway and then to Derek Moss. Your Honor, I'd like to submit Defense Exhibit A. This is a consulting contract between myself and Morrison and Associates, signed by senior partner Richard Morrison on August 23rd. 3 weeks before the alleged trespassing occurred. Judge Holloway read the document carefully. Derek Moss was doing the same, and his face was getting redder by the second. As you'll see, Your Honor, the contract explicitly grants me access to the firm's archives for research purposes, including after-hours access when necessary. I was hired to assist with case research on several ongoing matters. The courtroom erupted in whispers again. Judge Holloway banged her gavel once. Order. She looked at Derek Moss. Mr. Moss, did your office verify whether the defendant had permission to be in that building before filing charges? Derek stood slowly. He opened his mouth, closed it, then opened it again. Your Honor, we relied on the security report and the statement from Mr. Torres. We had no reason to believe. Did you verify it? Yes or no? Derek's shoulders sagged. No, Your Honor, we did not. The teenager wasn't done. Your Honor, I'd like to make a motion to dismiss these charges with prejudice. Judge Holloway looked at him sharply. With prejudice? Yes, Your Honor. And I'd also like to file a motion for malicious prosecution against the district attorney's office. The courtroom exploded. This wasn't just about beating a trespassing charge anymore. This kid was going on the attack. Judge Holloway banged her gavel 3 times hard. Order, everyone settle down right now. The noise in the courtroom died down to nervous silence. Derek Moss looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. His boss, the district attorney herself, was going to have his head for this. A malicious prosecution claim was serious business. It meant the teenager wasn't just defending himself anymore. He was saying the DA's office had filed charges without doing their homework, wasting court time and damaging his reputation in the process. "Young man," Judge Holloway said carefully, "those are serious allegations. Do you understand what you're asking for?" "Yes, Your Honor, I do." The teenager's voice stayed calm and steady. "The prosecution filed criminal charges against me without conducting even basic due diligence. One phone call to Morrison and Associates would have confirmed I had authorized access. Instead, they rushed to charge a minor with a crime based solely on assumptions about my age and appearance." Derek stood up quickly. "Your Honor, that's not fair. We had a security report, we had video evidence. You had a security guard who admitted he never checked the access list," the teenager interrupted. "You had video of me entering a building I was legally contracted to enter. And you had assumptions." He said that last word with extra weight. Judge Holloway raised her hand to silence Derek before he could respond. "I'll hear your motion, but not right now. First, let's address the matter at hand." She looked down at the contract again, then at Derek. "Mr. Moss, given this new evidence, what is the state's position?" Derek looked like he wanted the floor to swallow him whole. He glanced at his notes, at the contract, then back at the judge. "Your Honor, if the defense has a valid contract granting access to the premises, then clearly there's been a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" The teenager's eyebrows went up. "I was arrested, fingerprinted, and charged with a crime. I've spent 3 months with this hanging over my head. That's more than a misunderstanding, Mr. Moss." Judge Holloway set down her gavel carefully. "Mr. Moss, I'm going to ask you one more time. Does the state wish to proceed with these charges?" Derek swallowed hard. "No, Your Honor, the state moves to dismiss. Motion granted. Charges are dismissed with prejudice." Judge Holloway made a note in her file. "Now about this malicious prosecution claim. There's more, Your Honor." The teenager reached into his backpack again. This time he pulled out a thick folder, stuffed with papers and marked with colored tabs. Judge Holloway's eyes narrowed. "More?" "Yes, ma'am." "Your Honor." He placed the folder on the defense table. "The reason I was at Morrison and Associates that night wasn't just for general case research. I was gathering evidence for an investigation I've been conducting for the past 6 months." The courtroom went dead quiet. Even the court reporters stopped typing for a second. "What kind of investigation?" Judge Holloway asked slowly. The teenager opened the folder and pulled out a stack of documents. "An investigation into systemic failures in the public defense system for juvenile cases in this county, specifically involving Morrison and Associates and their contract to provide court-appointed attorneys for minors." Derek Moss sat down hard in his chair. Judge Holloway's face had gone very pale. "I've been looking into case files, billing records, and time logs," the teenager continued. "What I found is that Morrison and Associates has been billing the county for full-rate legal representation while providing minimal actual service to their juvenile clients. We're talking about lawyers spending less than 15 minutes on cases that should take hours, kids being pushed into plea deals without proper investigation, defense attorneys meeting their clients for the first time in the hallway outside this very courtroom." He pulled out a specific document and held it up. "This is a billing record showing Morrison and Associates charged the county for 12 hours of work on a case. But the actual attorney notes show only 18 minutes of client contact. The rest was administrative overhead they inflated to maximize profit." Judge Holloway leaned forward. "How did you get access to billing records?" "I was hired as a consultant, remember? I had legitimate access to the firm's files. What I found during my research made me realize something much bigger was happening. So I kept digging, staying late, going through archived cases. That's what I was doing the night I got arrested." The teenager walked closer to the bench. "Your Honor, over the past 3 years, Morrison and Associates has handled approximately 470 juvenile cases in this court. Based on the records I've reviewed, I estimate that at least 60% of those defendants received inadequate legal representation. Many were pressured into pleading guilty to crimes they may not have committed because their lawyers didn't have time to investigate properly." Judge Holloway looked like she might be sick. "That's a very serious accusation. I have documentation for every claim I'm making." He gestured to the thick folder. "Case files, billing records, internal memos from Morrison and Associates discussing how to maximize billable hours while minimizing actual work. There's even an email from Richard Morrison himself telling his associates to Move the juvenile cases quickly because they're not worth the time investment. Derek Moss had his head in his hands. This had gone from a simple trespassing case to a potential scandal that could bring down one of the city's biggest law firms. "Why didn't you bring this to someone's attention?" Judge Holloway asked. "Why sneak around at night?" "Because Richard Morrison is well connected, Your Honor. He plays golf with half the partners at other firms in the city. He donates to political campaigns. I'm 17 years old. Who was going to believe me if I just walked in with accusations?" The teenager's voice carried real emotion now. "I needed proof. Solid, undeniable proof. So I gathered it quietly, legally, using my access as a consultant." He paused, then added, "And then I got arrested for doing exactly that, which is why I'm filing for malicious prosecution. Because I think someone at Morrison and Associates figured out what I was looking into and wanted me discredited before I could go public." Judge Holloway sat back in her chair. The weight of what she was hearing seemed to settle over her like a heavy blanket. For years, she'd been presiding over juvenile cases, trusting that the court-appointed defenders were doing their jobs. She'd seen kids take plea deals, seen quick resolutions to cases, and she'd thought the system was working efficiently. Now this teenager was telling her it had all been a lie. "Your Honor," the teenager said quietly, "every time a kid stood in this courtroom without proper representation, justice failed. Every time someone took a plea deal because their lawyer spent 15 minutes on their case instead of 15 hours, the system failed. And every time a judge assumed that everything was fine because the paperwork looked good, we all failed. The courtroom was so quiet you could hear the air conditioning humming." Judge Holloway looked at the teenager for a long moment. When she finally spoke, her voice was different, smaller. "How many kids did you say?" "At least 280, Your Honor, maybe more. And those are just the ones I've been able to document so far." She closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them again, there was something new there. Something that looked like shame mixed with determination. "Mr. Moss," she said, "I want the district attorney in my chambers immediately, and someone get me the county administrator on the phone." She looked at the teenager. "You'll need to present all of this evidence formally. Can you do that?" "Yes, Your Honor. I'm prepared to file a civil rights lawsuit on behalf of every juvenile who was denied adequate representation." Judge Holloway nodded slowly. "This court is in recess for 1 hour." She stood, and everyone in the courtroom rose with her. As she walked toward her chambers, her footsteps seemed heavier than before. The hour-long recess stretched into 3 hours. Word spread through the courthouse like wildfire. Lawyers lingered in hallways, whispering to each other. Court clerks peeked into courtroom 4B, trying to catch a glimpse of the teenager who'd just blown up the entire juvenile justice system. Local news vans started parking outside the building, their reporters making frantic calls to confirm the rumors. The teenager sat alone at the defense table, reviewing his documents one more time. A few lawyers approached him wanting to know if he needed help, offering their cards. He politely declined. He'd come this far on his own. He needed to finish it the same way. Finally, the bailiff announced that court was back in session. Judge Holloway returned to the bench, but she wasn't alone. The district attorney, Patricia Chen, a sharp woman in her 40s with a reputation for being tough on crime, sat in the front row. Next to her was the county administrator and 2 people in expensive suits who looked like they handled legal problems for the county. Everyone looked grim. Judge Holloway settled into her chair and took a long breath before speaking. "This court is now back in session. Before we continue, I want to establish something clearly for the record." She looked directly at the teenager. "I owe you an apology. When you walked into my courtroom this morning, I made assumptions about you based on your age and appearance. I was dismissive, condescending, and unprofessional. That was wrong, and I'm sorry." The teenager nodded. "Thank you, Your Honor." "However," Judge Holloway continued, "an apology doesn't fix what you've uncovered here. We've spent the recess reviewing the evidence you've compiled, and I have to say it's damning." She gestured to the district attorney. "Ms. Chen has some questions for you." Patricia Chen stood up. Unlike Derek Moss, she didn't look angry or defensive. She looked tired and disappointed, like someone who'd just discovered a crack in a foundation she thought was solid. "First, I want to say that if what you've documented is accurate, and it appears to be, then this office owes you more than an apology," she began. "We should have caught this. That's our job, and we failed." She pulled out a legal pad with notes. I need to understand the scope of what we're dealing with. You mentioned 280 cases. Can you break that down for me? The teenager stood and opened his folder. I can. Of the 470 juvenile cases handled by Morrison and Associates over 3 years, I've fully reviewed 280 so far. Of those, I found serious issues with legal representation in about 68%. That's roughly 190 kids. What kind of issues specifically? Patricia asked. The most common problem was inadequate time spent on cases. The average client meeting was 12 minutes. 12 minutes to discuss charges, explain options, and decide on a plea. No investigation of the facts, no witness interviews, minimal review of evidence. He pulled out a chart he'd made. I also found 23 cases where the attorney never actually met with the client before the hearing. They got the case file in the morning and handled the plea that afternoon. Someone in the gallery gasped. Patricia Chen's jaw tightened. Go on. There were also issues with conflicts of interest that weren't properly disclosed. Morrison and Associates represent several businesses in the county. In at least 12 cases, the victims or witnesses were employees of those businesses, but the defense attorneys never addressed the potential conflict. The teenager flipped to another section, and then there's the billing fraud. The firm charged the county for an average of 8 hours per case, but actual attorney time averaged under 1 hour. Patricia Chen looked at the county administrator, who was taking furious notes. That's theft of public funds. Yes, ma'am, it is. Judge Holloway spoke up. I've reviewed a sample of the cases you flagged. I remember some of these kids. I remember thinking how efficiently their cases moved through my court. Her voice was heavy with regret. I thought I was running a tight ship. Instead, I was rubber stamping injustice. Your Honor, the teenager said carefully. You trusted the system. Everyone did. That's what Morrison and Associates counted on. They knew that if cases moved quickly and nobody complained, no one would look closer. But you looked closer, Patricia Chen said. Why? What made you suspicious in the first place? The teenager was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer. Because it almost happened to me. 2 years ago, before I passed the bar, I got caught up in something stupid. Wrong place, wrong time kind of thing. I was 15, and I got appointed a lawyer for Morrison and Associates. He paused, and everyone in the courtroom leaned forward slightly. My lawyer met me for maybe 10 minutes. Told me I should take a plea deal, that fighting it would make things worse. Didn't ask about my side of the story, didn't look at the evidence. Just wanted me to sign papers and move on. The teenager's hands gripped the edge of the table. Luckily, my aunt works as a paralegal. She raised me after my parents died. She knew something was wrong, so she scraped together money to hire a different attorney, a real one who actually investigated. And what happened? Judge Holloway asked quietly. Turns out I wasn't even at the location where the incident occurred. The new lawyer found security footage from a store 3 blocks away, showing me buying groceries at the exact time of the alleged offense. Case dismissed, but it took 2 months and $3,000. We didn't have to prove my innocence because my first lawyer didn't spend 30 minutes checking the facts. The courtroom was silent. That's when I decided to become a lawyer, he continued. I studied constantly, took online college courses, passed the bar as soon as I was old enough, and I promised myself I'd make sure what happened to me didn't happen to other kids. Patricia Chen sat down slowly. So you got yourself hired at Morrison and Associates? Yes, ma'am. I figured the best way to expose them was from the inside. I needed access to their files, their billing records, their internal communications. As a consultant, I could get all of that legally. And they hired a 17-year-old as a consultant? One of the county lawyers asked. The teenager almost smiled. They never asked my age. I submitted my credentials, my bar certification, and a proposal for research services. Richard Morrison was impressed enough to offer me the contract. I think he assumed I was older. People usually do when they only see paperwork. Judge Holloway shook her head in amazement. You orchestrated all of this. I documented all of this, Your Honor. Morrison and Associates orchestrated the fraud. I just brought it to light. Patricia Chen stood again. All right, here's what's going to happen. My office is opening an immediate investigation into Morrison and Associates. We'll be reviewing every single case they've handled, not just juveniles. We're also launching an audit of their billing practices. She looked at the teenager. And we're going to need your full cooperation. All your evidence, your testimony, everything. You have it, he said immediately. As for the malicious prosecution claim, she continued, I'm not going to fight it. You're right. We should have done basic due diligence before filing charges. The county will settle that claim and issue a public apology. Judge Holloway added, I'm also ordering a review of every juvenile case that's come through my courtroom in the past 3 years. Any defendant who received inadequate representation will have the option to have their case reviewed and potentially overturned. The teenager nodded. Thank you, Your Honor, that's all I wanted. Just a chance to make this right. Patricia Chen walked over to him and extended her hand. You did good work here. Unconventional, maybe a little risky, but good work. Have you thought about what you want to do next? He shook her hand. Actually, yes. I want to open a legal clinic for teenagers, free representation for kids who can't afford a real lawyer, someone who'll actually spend time on their cases. The county might be able to help with funding for something like that, the county administrator said from his seat. Consider it part of our effort to reform the system. Judge Holloway banged her gavel softly. This court is adjourned. But young man, before you go, I want you to know something. He looked up at her. You taught me an important lesson today, one I should have learned a long time ago. Never judge someone by how they look. Everyone who walks through that door deserves the same respect and the same chance at justice. Her voice cracked slightly. I won't forget that. And I won't let what happened here happen again. The teenager picked up his backpack and folder. As he walked toward the exit, lawyers and court staff gave him a path, some nodding respectfully. The kid in the oversized hoodie had just changed everything. 6 months later, the courthouse looked the same on the outside, but everything inside had changed. The scandal hit the news within hours of that courtroom session. Morrison and associates tried to fight back at first, calling it a misunderstanding, claiming the teenager had misinterpreted their billing practices. But once the district attorney's office started pulling files and the media got hold of the internal emails, the firm's defense collapsed like a house of cards. Richard Morrison and 3 of his senior partners were disbarred. The State Bar Association held emergency hearings and found them guilty of fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, and violations of professional conduct. The firm itself was dissolved, its assets sold off to pay back the county and to fund victim compensation. It was the biggest legal scandal the city had seen in decades, but that was just the beginning. The teenager, true to his word, opened the Youth Justice Clinic in a small office space downtown. The county provided initial funding, and donations poured in from lawyers across the state who were horrified by what had happened. The clinic offered free legal representation to any minor facing criminal charges, with one simple rule: every client got real attention, real investigation, and a real defense. Within the first month, they had 40 cases. By month 3, they had a waiting list. The teenager hired 2 other young attorneys and 3 law students as interns. His aunt, who'd sacrificed so much to save him years ago, left her paralegal job to become the clinic's office manager. They worked long hours, took on tough cases, and won more often than they lost. More importantly, they spent time with every single client, making sure each kid understood their rights, their options, and that someone was actually fighting for them. Word spread fast in the community. Parents who'd watched their kids get pushed through the system with barely a word from their lawyer started calling. Is it true? They'd ask. Is there really someone who will listen to my son's side of the story? The answer was always yes. Judge Holloway kept her promise too. She ordered a comprehensive review of every juvenile case from the past 3 years. A special panel of judges from neighboring counties was brought in to ensure fairness. They worked through case files one by one, looking for signs of inadequate representation. They found plenty. By the end of the review, 73 cases were overturned. 73 kids who'd been living with criminal records, who'd been denied opportunities because of convictions on their records, got a second chance. Some cases were dismissed entirely. Others got new trials with proper representation. A few kids who'd served time in juvenile detention were released and compensated. One case in particular stuck with Judge Holloway. A 15-year-old girl who'd pleaded guilty to assault based on 15 minutes of legal advice. When the case was properly investigated, they discovered she'd actually been defending herself from an attack, and there were 3 witnesses who'd never been interviewed. The charges were dropped completely. The girl, now 16, came to the courthouse to thank Judge Holloway personally. I thought the system didn't care about kids like me, the girl said, tears in her eyes. I thought I deserved what happened because nobody bothered to ask my side. Judge Holloway had no good answer for that. All she could say was, "I'm sorry we failed you. But we're trying to do better now." The reforms didn't stop with case reviews. The county completely overhauled how public defenders were assigned to juvenile cases. No more bulk contracts to big firms. Instead, they created a dedicated juvenile defender's office with attorneys who specialized in representing minors. Every lawyer had to undergo training in adolescent development, trauma-informed practices, and cultural competency. The district attorney's office implemented new policies too. Before filing charges against any minor, prosecutors had to verify the basic facts of the case and document their due diligence. No more rushing to judgment. No more assuming kids were guilty because they looked a certain way or came from certain neighborhoods. And Judge Holloway herself changed. She attended training on implicit bias and adolescent brain development. She started asking more questions in her courtroom, pushing attorneys harder to prove they'd actually prepared. When a defense lawyer seemed unprepared, she'd call them out publicly and continue the case until they did their job properly. Some people complained she was being too soft. Letters to the editor criticized her for coddling juvenile delinquents. But Judge Holloway didn't care about the criticism anymore. She'd seen what happened when the system moved too fast, when it cared more about efficiency than justice. She wasn't going back to that. One afternoon, about 8 months after everything started, the teenager showed up at Judge Holloway's chambers. She'd invited him for coffee, something she rarely did with attorneys. They sat in her office, surrounded by law books and case files, and talked like two people who'd been through something difficult together. "I've been thinking about that morning," Judge Holloway said, stirring sugar into her coffee. "When you walked into my courtroom and I treated you like you were nobody, like you didn't matter. It's in the past, Your Honor." "Maybe, but I need to say this." She set down her spoon and looked at him directly. "I've been a judge for 20 years. I thought I was good at my job. I thought I saw people clearly, treated everyone fairly. But the truth is I'd stopped seeing people at all. I saw case numbers, efficient dockets, smooth operations. I forgot that every single person who stands in that courtroom is someone's child, someone's future." The teenager listened quietly. "You reminded me of something I should never have forgotten," she continued. "Justice isn't about speed or efficiency. It's about taking the time to see people, to hear them, to give them a real chance. And sometimes the people who need that chance the most are the ones who don't look like they deserve it." "Everyone deserves it," he said simply. "That's the whole point of justice." Judge Holloway smiled sadly. "A 17-year-old had to teach me that lesson. A kid who I mocked in my own courtroom had to show me how to be a better judge." She shook her head. "The irony isn't lost on me. You're doing the work now, though. That's what matters. Thanks to you." She raised her coffee cup slightly. "So thank you for having the courage to do what you did, for not giving up when you could have, for caring about kids you'd never met because you knew what it felt like to be ignored by the system." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, two people from completely different worlds who'd somehow ended up fighting for the same thing. "What's next for you?" "Joe,"